Hello, everyone, and welcome. We will shortly be starting our webinar today, just at the hour. I will allow a couple of seconds more to let people come in. But let me begin by welcoming you all to this webinar. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. It is a pleasure to have you at this webinar, and a very warm welcome from my side to this webinar on Nothing About Youth Without Youth, Advancing Decent Work and Social Justice Together. My name is Isha Moitra, and I work as a Youth Employment Officer at the International Labour Organization, and it is my pleasure to moderate this session today. Please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself and tell us your organization as well as where you're joining us from today. This webinar is co-hosted by the Prospects program funded by the Government of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, as well as the Youth Foresight Knowledge Platform. This is a global knowledge facility jointly managed by the Global Initiative on Decent Jobs for Youth, as well as Generation Unlimited. Today's discussion is timely as we celebrate the World Day of Social Justice on Friday. Social justice is about decent work opportunities, it's about labor rights and inclusive labor markets. At the same time, it is also about who shapes these systems. And that is where we come in today. If young people are excluded from designing programs and decisions that affect their futures, our pursuit of social justice is incomplete. And this is where we will be discussing what really is the role of meaningful youth engagement and how do we engage young people as we advance the goals of decent work and social justice. A few housekeeping rules before we start. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the event webpage after the webinar. Your microphones will be muted during the session, but please feel free to ask any questions or comments that you may have using the chat function, as well as the Q&A box. We'll be monitoring it throughout the webinar as well as responding to the extent possible. So with that, let us begin. And what better way to start the session by hearing from an inspiring young person themselves. It is my pleasure to introduce Rahel Daris Marchena, who is a communication specialist with the Global Refugee Youth Network. Rahel Daris, over to you.
Thank you so much, Isha. And hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to begin with a fundamental principle of our work. Young people are not just beneficiaries of employment programs. We are right holders, we are innovators, and we are the partners you need to shape the labor markets of tomorrow. When we say nothing about youth without youth, I invite you to reflect on what actually means. It is not just about the presence, because presence alone doesn't guarantee influence. It is about the partnership and collaboration with young people to ensure that these programs are impactful. So, for refugee and displacement youth, meaningful engagement isn't just an abstract concept. It is a timeline between a program that works and one that failed. If a program is designed without the understanding of legal restrictions, documentation barriers, or the immediate socioeconomic pressure faced by displacement population, the reach will be really limited. When youth are not integrated into the early stage of design, even the most well-intentioned initiative risks overlooking the realities that dictate whether a young person can truly participate and thrive. Through my work with the Global Refugee Network and various youth organizations and refugee youth organizations, I've seen how this partnership transforms real outcomes. Refugee-led organizations possess the unique capacity to build trust and bridge the gap between institutional objective and community realities. However, it is important to recognize that participation comes in many forms. Too often, young people are invited to the table only after the decisions have been already made. And there is a big difference between being asked for input on a path that has been already set and being empowered to help shape that path from the start. True engagement means having a real influence on decisions that follows. That is how lasting trust is built. If we want to turn intentions into real actions, I see 5 ways we can engage with refugee and refugee-led organizations and youth-led organizations. So first, initiate engaging at the problem decision stage, because involving youth at the point of conception fundamentally improves the quality and relevance of the solution. Second, resource participation appropriately. Compensations, accessibility, and also sustainable funding for youth organizations are not optionals. They are enabling conditions for true partnership. Third, ensure protective and enabling environments, because for displacement youth, participation can involve risks related to legal status and visibility. So safeguarding and data protection must be considered in every framework. Fourth, invest in youth-led ecosystems. This requires a shift from viewing youth-led organizations as intermediary or just participants to recognizing them as primary actors and partners in implementation. Fifth and last, close the accountability loop, because it is vital to communicate clearly how youth inputs have shaped the final outcomes. Because without transparency, consultation remains as a one-time event rather than as sustainable practice. A call to action is not enough if it stays on paper. It can be occasional. It has to be part of the system. We need to engage in our program cycle. We need to engage youth in our partnership and also in how we train and support the staff. That's exactly why the Meaningful Youth Engagement for Decent Work package is so valuable, because it helps turn a call to action into an everyday practice. As you engage with the discussion today, I invite you to reflect on a critical question. How can we create opportunities where young people or youth inputs are really shaping these decisions? Our collective goal is to advance decent work and social justice. To achieve, we must recognize the design with young people. We have to resource the leadership, and we have to measure our success by how effectively we shift power into practice. Nothing about youth without youth is not just a slogan. It's a commitment to a more inclusive and just future. Thank you so much. Or back to Isha.
Thank you so much, Rahel Daris, for that, for the powerful reminder of what it is that each of us and our organizations can do, actionable items that we can do to meaningfully engage youth, but also to bringing attention to the fact that not all young people, youth are not a homogeneous group, and some young people, such as young refugees and forcibly displaced youth, have additional barriers to engaging with our institutions and organizations. Thank you very much, Rahel, for your opening speech to this session. With that, I would like to now understand or get a sense of where our audience today stands when it comes to meaningful youth engagement. And so we'd like to open a Menti poll to get a sense of what you think meaningful youth engagement is. So the instructions are in the chat. You can either, there are 3 ways of joining. You can either scan the QR code or enter the website link, go to menti.com and use the code to join in. So I invite you to join our Menti poll and share with us your thoughts. So in 2 to 3 words, what do you think meaningful youth engagement is versus tokenistic engagement? So in 2 to 3 words, what makes youth engagement meaningful rather than tokenistic? So let's hear from you, our audience. Again, the instructions in the chat, you will see the link that you can simply click and go to the link to answer the question. Or you could directly go to menti.com. So participate in decisions. Co-production, so that is partnership with youth, which Rahel also paid focus to in her speech. What are some other ideas on what is meaningful youth engagement? Respecting their opinions. Yes, intentional. I think intentionality is an important one. Trust. True results. So ensuring that youth inputs are directed towards actual results. It's not paying lip service to getting youth recommendations or inputs. Recommendations accepted. So essentially ensuring young people's inputs have some influence. Okay, it's youth at the policy table. Okay, we have lots of ideas here on what meaningful looks like. I'll maybe give it a couple more seconds and then move to our next poll. Okay, co-creation. I see a lot of co-production, co-creation, partnership. And that's really important because it's more, I think, it's more than consultation. It's sort of co-creating and working together with youth. Okay, and capacity building seems to be coming out the highest here as well. So thank you for participating in this poll. And we now move to our next poll. So, we've spoken about what is it that makes youth engagement meaningful. But from all our institutions, we know that achieving youth engagement is still sometimes ridden with barriers. So, based on your work, what do you think are top two, say, biggest barriers you face in actually putting meaningful youth engagement to practice? Please share with us your experiences and insights on what you think is really the roadblock to engaging young people. Financial support, I think everybody can agree and relate to that. Or lack of support in general. Maybe there is no buy-in or commitment to actually engaging young people at an institutional level. So I see resources, lack of financial support or lack of support in general. Limited time, which I guess, yes, because a lot of, I guess, youth work is, it's usually in meaningful youth engagement needs intentionality, it needs dedicated time to go about it. So that is something that we could relate to as well. What else do we see here? Access to information. Okay, maybe there is less information or skills and capacity in terms of how to engage youth, and hopefully this webinar can contribute a little bit by hearing how others are doing so. Okay, thank you very much for engaging in this Mentimeter. So if I can ask our colleague to stop sharing the slide. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. And I hope the webinar and the discussion today will contribute to answering some of these questions or even promoting some exchange among us so we can learn from each other. With that, I would now like to move to really setting the scene for today's conversation and actually presenting to you one of the ILO tools on how to meaningfully engage young people. So I will share my screen and I hope you're able to see it. Okay. So let's begin by actually talking about what is meant by meaningful youth engagement. So through the poll, we see that, we do have some sense of what is meaningful rather than tokenistic. But at the ILO, we started by defining what does meaningful youth engagement look like when we talk about programs that create decent jobs for young people. And the definition that we came up with in consultation with young people, but as partners and ILO staff themselves, is that youth engagement is a participatory process. And it involves young people not just as beneficiaries, but also viewing them as contributors, partners, stakeholders, and leaders when it comes to designing employment programs or initiatives. So here it's important to keep in mind the participatory aspect of it, as well as the fact that young people can play several roles, not just as young people being consulted, but also as partners and stakeholders of a program. The other part of this definition is that it should span across all phases of the programming cycle. So it shouldn't be that we engage young people in the design stage and then there is no follow-up. So key element is engaging young people across the programming cycle, from governance, this design and planning, implementation, right through monitoring and evaluation. And two other critical components here is the capacity building and the enabling environment. We can't expect young people to show up at discussions on employment programs and discussions on decisions that impact their work without having the skills or the technical knowledge in these areas. So we must also take the effort to capacitate them to be able to engage in these discussions, as well as create an enabling environment where young people feel comfortable and have the agency to contribute to discussions and implementation. So this is our definition of meaningful youth engagement that we have come up with. And as we go through the discussion today, we can see, how many elements of that we cover. How do we ensure that engagement is meaningful? So what is it that ensures that engagement is meaningful rather than tokenistic? And here we identified 5 different sort of dimensions. First being voice. So as we were saying, young people should be capacitated or given the information to be able to express informed views. That is the first dimension. The second is space. So ensuring that the space we offer to young people is inclusive and it is an enabling environment that encourages their participation. They shouldn't be afraid of fear repercussions when it comes to expressing their views. The third is audience. So we must ensure that the right people are listening. When we invite young people to share their inputs to shape policies and programs, we must ensure that those that have the ability to take decisions are actually in the room. And young people are not just speaking to themselves, but are speaking to decision makers. The fourth aspect is influence, which is that youth inputs should have an actual influence in the decisions that we take when it comes to program design, implementation, or monitoring and evaluation. And it shouldn't be just paying lip service to meaningful youth engagement. Their views should be considered when we take action. And lastly, accountability. So ensuring that young people have the information on what is actually happening with their contributions. So we close the feedback loop and ensure young people are aware of what happens to the inputs, to the insights that they provide, and their feedback is actually shaping outcomes. And this is so we've spoken about what makes youth engagement meaningful, but how do we actually engage youth? Practically, when we say youth engagement, what does that mean? So that can take 4 different forms. And this is really, a ladder in terms of the degrees of engagement, but it isn't a value judgment on what is better than the other. Sometimes youth consultations are better for the end goal that you are trying to achieve, whereas other times working with youth as partners may be more suitable. So this is just the 4 different types of ways we can engage young people. The first is through youth consultations. So that is getting young people's inputs through youth consultations, surveys, or any medium to get their inputs on program design, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation. The second is providing specific roles to young people to contribute to our program. So that could be, for example, as a youth trainer to a skills program that we're designing. The third is partnering with young people. So whether that's working with young people as implementing partners or working with them in co-delivering a program, that is how we could work with young people as partners in delivering employment programs. And the last degree is really recognizing youth as leaders themselves. And this could include, for example, funding youth-led initiatives or supporting youth-led initiatives themselves. So this is just a framing of our session today. But all of this and more is available in the ILO training package. So the Meaningful Youth Engagement for Decent Work, a training package on engaging young people in employment programs. This is the training package that we launched last year, and it is really designed to support you and practitioners in how you can engage young people in employment programs and initiatives. While the guide itself is, or the training package itself is applicable to young people in general, there is a particular focus on forcibly displaced youth. Um, and it was developed in close collaboration with young people themselves. So young people like Rahel, young people like Joel, present in the webinar today, provided inputs into the design of the training package, but they also supported the delivery of this training to ILO staff. So young people had a key role in developing this training package, but also in the pilot rolling out of this training. So what is in this training package? There are four sort of distinct elements in the training package. There is the guidance manual that includes frameworks and principles for engagement. It has some self-reflection exercises, as well as case studies. So real examples of how other institutions are engaging young people in employment programs that you could apply to your own work. There is an annex with sample templates. So these include terms of reference for youth advisory groups or agenda for consultations. So really templates that you could utilize in any endeavor that you make to engage young people in your work. So the audience for these two pieces is really practitioners and program managers and program teams who want to apply youth engagement to their work. And the second sort of chunk is the facilitators toolkit and the master slide deck. So the facilitators toolkit is designed to help trainers in delivering training. So it includes a sample agenda for delivering such a training, activity instructions, as well as a training evaluation survey. And it's complemented by a master slide deck of training materials. And as you would imagine, this is directed towards trainers or facilitators that wish to roll out such training. So this is my last slide, which is encouraging you to really adopt meaningful youth engagement approaches in your work. And just a quick guidance on what this may look like as you leave our webinar today. So you may start with a reflection to really look at how it is that you are engaging young people in your institution. And for that, we have a self-assessment tool in the guide itself or in the training package itself on how are you engaging young people. So really a quick reality check on how you're performing currently when it comes to youth engagement. You may then consider strengthening your own capacity. So using the training package to enhance your own skills on meaningfully engaging young people before you move to make this an institutional priority. So capacitate both your institution, but perhaps partners on meaningfully engaging young people. And this could be through a standalone training, or it could be through integrating components of meaningful youth engagement in other capacity building training that you may have. I will stop there and I will maybe pause for a couple of minutes to see if you have any questions on the training package itself. But we have a lot more exciting conversations coming up through our panel. So I may also encourage you to put your questions about the training package or my presentation in the chat as we move on to our panel today. So I won't take questions maybe now specifically on the training package, and we move directly to our panel today. So it is my pleasure to welcome our panelists and to hear from each one of them today on how they are working on youth engagement, as well as their personal experiences on being engaged in different initiatives as young people themselves. So I'd like to begin by posing our first question today to Joel Amani. Joel Amani Mafigi is a refugee youth representative himself, as well as the co-founder of Unleashed Potentials in Motion, that is the refugee youth-led organization based in Uganda. So Joel, as we start with you, why is it important for young refugees like yourself to be meaningfully engaged in shaping youth employment programs and policies designed for them? And what forms of engagement have you found to be effective in ensuring that refugee youth perspectives are genuinely shaping outcomes rather than remaining, say, symbolic? Over to you, Joella.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks a lot for having me, and thanks for the presentation yourself. Again, I'm originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo, a refugee in Uganda for the last 17 years, and I co-found Unleashed Potentials in Motion, where we empower young people to create social businesses and also decent jobs. I'm here not only as a refugee representative, but also as a former member of the first cohort of the United Nations Youth Office Reference Group, and also a former representative at the Global Youth Investment Platform Task Force. And across these spaces, I have seen a common pattern. Programs designed for refugee youth often struggle, not because necessarily of lack of funding, but also due to lack of meaningful youth engagement. And so it's important that young people are meaningfully shape youth employment programs and policies designed for them. So for me, some of the key areas that I see that are important for this engagement, first, because lived experience mitigate policy and program failure. Refugee youth understand the real barriers to employment, barriers like documentation challenges, work permit restrictions, language gaps, limited digital access, discrimination, and pressure to support our families immediately. So when employment programs are designed without these lived experiences, they risk becoming disconnected from the reality. Trainings may be offered without legal pathways to work. For example, entrepreneurship programs may ignore regulatory barriers. And when refugees are engaged from the beginning, not at the end, programs move from only becoming participatory to relevant, but also implementable. Secondly, meaningful engagement builds ownership and trust. When young refugees co-design solutions, they don't just participate, they mobilize others, they become ambassadors of opportunities. At Unleashed, we have seen how young youth-led models increase participation because young people trust solutions built for their peers. Engagement transforms beneficiaries into partners, and that shift alone is a great impact. Thirdly, engagement shifts the narrative. Too often, refugee youth are framed as only, vulnerable, unemployed, or even dependent. But when we are part of shaping employment policies, we are recognized as innovators, entrepreneurs, and contributors to the local economies. In the United Nations Youth Office Reference Group, I've seen how structured youth engagement can influence institutional thinking, moving from seeing youth as recipient of aid to seeing youth as co-creators to development. But let me be clear, not all engagement is meaningful. Meaningful engagement is not a one-day consultation, not symbolic. It is not a photo opportunity. Meaningful youth engagement has structure and power behind it. It starts with early stage co-designing. Refugee youth must be involved before frameworks are finalized. It needs assessments in shaping theories of change and even in budget discussions. At Global Youth Investment Platform, youth influence became real when young people helped shape funding priorities, not just implement pre-decided projects. It also requires decision-making power. Advisory roles are important, but they must connect to the influence. Youth representatives should sit on steering committees, boards, and policy task forces with clear mandates and accountability mechanisms. Engagement without influence becomes actually tokenism. Another critical element is resourcing youth-led organization. Refugee youth-led initiatives often operate with minimal short-term funding, yet these organizations are closest to the community and best positioned to design adaptive employment solutions. Flexible core funding, not just project-based grants, enable sustainability. And finally, meaningful engagement requires feedback and accountability. If youth provide inputs, institutions must report back. Here's what changed because of your contribution. Without that feedback loop, participation becomes only performative. And so systematically, we must shift from consultation to co-ownership. We must budget for engagement, not treat it as voluntary goodwill. We must recognize refugees, youth expertise as professional expertise, and we must ensure inclusion, especially of young women, youth with disabilities, and those who are often invisible in formal spaces. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joel, for those really valuable insights. I think you made some extremely strong points in terms of budgeting youth engagement, in terms of making sure that they're actually impacting decisions. And I really take that takeaway of it's not a photo opportunity, but it's really about ensuring that young people are making an impact. When the insights and inputs are taken into consideration. And thank you for also drawing attention to the examples of how the UN system is engaging young people, including through the UN Youth Reference Group. Thank you very much, Joel, for sharing your insights. And we now move to getting a government perspective on meaningful youth engagement. So I'd like to now move to Koen Stoop, a policy officer at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, working in the youth education and work team. So my question to you is that the Netherlands has actually been one of the governments at the forefront of institutionalizing meaningful youth engagement, including by prioritizing the engagement of forcibly displaced young people. So what approaches have worked and what good practices would you share with other governments looking to embed meaningful youth engagement in their youth employment initiatives? Over to you, Koen.
Thank you, Isha, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to join today's conversation. For the Netherlands, at the core of our aim to engage young people is our Youth at Heart strategy, which was launched 5 years ago in 2020. And during the development of this strategy, we consulted with over 1,000 young people worldwide, asking them what they wanted the Netherlands to invest in. And the result of that engagement are what are now the 3 Youth at Heart pillars, being education, youth employment, and meaningful youth participation. Focusing on the latter with regards to meaningful youth participation, there are various ways in which we try to institutionalize that within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. For example, we have an International Youth Advisory Committee comprising of 13 young people from Africa and the Middle East that advise us at the ministry here in The Hague about a range of policy topics. And by now we also have almost 20 local youth advisory committees at embassy level mainly in Africa and the Middle East. And this number is growing. So I think that shows the importance of engaging with local youth in all the work that we're doing as an MFA. And moreover, we've also launched a toolkit for meaningful youth participation, and I see a lot of overlap with the guide that was presented by you, Isha, and I think that's great to see. Because one of the key notions that is also key for us is that youth really should be involved throughout the entire program cycle, so from design to implementation to evaluation and so forth. And therefore, also in our development programming, we really aim to engage with young people as equal partners, to learn from them which interventions are actually needed from their perspectives. And for example, in a displacement context, youth often face disproportionate barriers in accessing protection, education, training, and decent work. And this is why the Netherlands, together with ILO, UNICEF, UNHCR, the World Bank, and IFC, we successfully built the Prospects Partnership to improve the living situation of both refugees and host communities in the MENA region and the Horn of Africa. And advancing youth employment is an important strand of this work. And I think a lot of success was made possible by the youth initiatives within this partnership, through which we have been able to actively involve young people in shaping the current phase of programming. And through youth-focused training and capacity building, youth have gained skills and competencies that actually match the 21st century labor market needs. And finally, we've also directly funded youth-led capacity building, such as the Global Refugee Youth Network. And we're very happy that this is now being consolidated in a Prospects for Youth technical facility that provides integrated support for to Prospects countries to strengthen this realization of rights, the access to services, and also socioeconomic opportunities for young people. Maybe very concretely, your question, Isha, looking back at the past 5 years, engaging with many young people from all over the world, a major lesson that I have learned is that meaningful youth participation is not a static concept. So what meaningful participation is to a young person changes every time, depending on the specific barriers that a young person is facing, the cultural context, their socioeconomic background, and so forth. And for me, that always serves as a reminder that it's great to have strategies, to have toolkits and such, but that real meaningful youth participation really requires every time and again to learn from young people how we can engage them best, really depending on the context. And as a policymaker, that requires us to be flexible and to be able to also be adaptive in our programming and the way that we work with young people. And therefore, I also want to just end by saying that it's how extremely valuable it is to actually hear from young people here today, like Rohildis and Joel, about their views of the challenges and the solutions. And I really think that if we work together, we can really make sure that we keep youth at heart of our programs and policies. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Koen, for sharing how the Netherlands is prioritizing youth engagement. And I think I think we really look to the Netherlands as one of the governments that is moving the needle on youth engagement. So thank you for prioritizing it and allowing us to continue working on meaningful youth engagement across our work. So thank you for sharing your lessons. And I hope that other governments and institutions joining are able to take a page from this book to also advance youth engagement in their work. So with that, we move to another example from a government that engages young people in their work. And I'd now like to invite Clara de Sousa Alves, who works as an advisor in the Portuguese Ministry of Labour, Solidarity and Social Security. And my question to you is also similar, which is how is Portugal prioritizing youth engagement in advancing decent work for young people? And can you share some examples of this in action? Over to you, Clara.
Hi, everyone. Allow me to begin by greeting my fellow panel members and all those joining us. And I will also like to thank you for the opportunity to take part in this discussion. I hope this exchange of information and all perspectives will contribute to a constructive and forward-looking debate. It is often said that Portugal has everything: sunshine, beaches, excellent cuisine, and a privileged geographical location. That is true. We have many strengths. However, we must also acknowledge a more challenging reality. Too many young people continue to build their future outside our country. In 2021, approximately 18.2% of young people aged between 25 and 34 who were born in Portugal were living abroad. This corresponds to more than 850,000 young people. When we consider unemployment data, the broader picture becomes clear. Portugal currently records an overall employment rate of 5.6%, historical low. Yet, youth unemployment, although it has declined to 18.4% in December 2025, remains structurally high. This indicates that young people face specific barriers in accessing the labor market. Entry is more difficult, contractual arrangements are often more fragile, and transition from education to employment remains a critical phase. In response, the government is acting decisively. First, through the Labour 21 reform is a comprehensive reform of labour legislation. This reform reflects the government's firm commitment to modernizing the legal framework and governing employment. It embraces flexibility as an instrument of balanced modernizations, aiming to establish rules aligned with the current realities of the economy. The objective is to enhance business competitiveness and productivity, thereby creating the conditions for better wages and improve career prospects for young people. Among the key measures are the reduction of excessively long probationary periods, the introduction of a specific legal ground for fixed-term contracts directed at those seeking their first employment, and the flexibilization of student employment contract regimes, encouraging earlier and more secure contracts with the labor market. At the same time, in order to support youth emancipation, we have extended the period of parental leave up to 6 months, totally paid, strengthening work-life balance and creating a more stable conditions for young families. In addition, the government created an exceptional incentive measures for the return to work for unemployment young people. This measure aims to reduce youth unemployment and actively promotes re-entry to the labor market. To date, it has already involved approximately 8,000 young people. But we are also attentive to young people who are not currently engaged in employment, education, or training, amounting to approximately 140,000 individuals in Portugal. For this particular vulnerable group, we have reinforced professional internship program as an instrument of activation, skills development, and an effective integration into sustainable employment. But when we speak about youth, employment, and social justice, we are ultimately speaking about trust. Trust that effort will be rewarded, trust that the opportunity exists, trust that a future can be built at our home. And Portugal is prioritizing youth not merely as beneficiaries of public policy, but as the central actors in its economies and social development strategy. Our objective is clear: to ensure that young people have access to decent, stable employment and genuine prospects for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Clara, for sharing some examples of youth employment policies as well as programs within Portugal, as well as how they're really youth-centered, keeping in mind the needs and aspirations of young people. Thank you for sharing those insights, Clara. We now move to our two youth representatives from the Youth Secretariat of the ILO Gyeonggi Global Labour Festa. So last year, we organized the Global Labour Festa in Korea in collaboration with the Gyeonggi province. And emerging from there was a youth call to action. So Harin and Shanita are representing the Youth Secretariat that worked on this call to action. So my question to both of you is, as members of this Youth Secretariat, what are some concrete actions that young people want to see from governments, social partners, and youth employment stakeholders in advancing decent work and social justice for young people? Over to you, Harin and Shanita.
Yeah, I'm gonna start answering first. So before we start, hello everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar, and thank you for the question. So to answer the question, I would like to share my screen first, so you could see the slides for our presentation. So given our time, Shanita and I will share what we consider most critical in the youth call to action regarding the question. And I will focus on institutionalizing meaningful youth participation in policy decision-making. So this is one of the most commonly raised concerns among young people. This is not a new demand. Youth have been calling for institutionalized participation and genuine inclusion in policy processes for a long time. Yet, progress remains limited. So during the process of developing the youth call to action in last December, we have agreed on two concrete actions to make this real. The first one is dual capacity building. So too often, training is directly only at young people. on tripartite mechanisms, social dialogue, and collective bargaining. That matters. But I would like to say this is not enough because focusing solely on youth capacity building might risk implying that the barriers about youth engagement are the young people's own. So we have to say non-user stakeholders also need capacity building to see young people as equal partners, to share decision-making power, and to recognize the value of youth engagement. Sometimes young people who are participated in social dialogue are told like this: "It's so amazing that you're doing this." So this might come from a good place, but it indicates that they treat youth participation as something exceptional or special rather than as a natural part of governance. So changing that mindset requires training for non-youth stakeholders. And the second action is a transparent feedback system for youth policy proposals. So many policy processes ask young people for their input and ideas, but young people rarely hear back. Are the recommendations rejected, accepted, or revised? If rejected, why or why not? So without that feedback, young people might end up repeating the same proposals with no opportunity to refine or strengthen their ideas. We are not saying every proposal must be adopted. Governments and social partners must consider a lot of factors such as budget, mandate, and feasibility. We understand that. But when the same proposals from young people are repeatedly ignored, the reasons must be stated clearly so that young people can come back with better, more actionable suggestions. So this is the end of my answer. And I will now hand it over to Shanita, who will share the other actions from the youth call to action.
All right, thank you very much. Should you go to the next slide, please? Karen, the next slide. All right, thank you. Hello, everyone, once again. And by the names of Shanita, as Isha gave in the brief from the background, let me just go straight to the concrete actions young workers we want to see in advancing the decent work and social justice. One, we focused on gender-responsive workplace design in green industries. And here, we look at adequate childcare facilities. We need these facilities in a way that they are flexible to young workers to access as their job at the workplace, have a better location and in good standards, which are safe and with security. Two, we look at the proper sanitation facilities. We are not looking at, when we talk about the gender responsiveness, we also include all. Here we mean both the male and the female. So proper sanitation facilities should also be put in place. And when you look at the ergonomic workstations, here we look at the PPEs, the protective prevent gears, which are personal that can help us from harming ourselves when we're at work. Here, it helps us improve on the performance in forms of quality and quantity, in quality and quantity and quality. Then the education to work transitions with quality apprenticeships. We look at the living wage, not paid, and the unpaid token spendings. Here, we can look at it in a way of having on trainings at the workplaces, having meaningful skills, training, alignment with local labor market needs, and thus lowering the levels of unemployment for the young workers. All in all, at the end of it all, we need a proper monitoring and evaluation to know that the young workers' needs are put into place. Thank you, Isha.
Thank you so much, Irene and Shanita, for sharing the youth call to action from Korea. I know that you had a lot of points that you shortlisted in the youth call to action, but thank you for focusing on the key priorities that young people want to see. And it is an example of young people really shaping how our organizations respond to the Global Youth Employment Challenge. So thank you both for sharing the insights on behalf of the Youth Secretariat. So with that, we move to our next speaker. It is my pleasure to now introduce Maria Kyprioutou, who is a youth development and civic engagement specialist at UNESCO. And Maria, my question to you is, what lessons can we draw from UNESCO's experience in promoting youth engagement that can then help us strengthen our efforts to co-create youth employment solutions with young people? Over to you, Maria.
Thank you very much, Isha. Before anything, let me say how excited we are to see the ILO training package. Of course, I mean, at UNESCO, we have been working on meaningful youth engagement for the past 2 decades, and we see a lot of synergies also and convergence with UNESCO's toolbox for youth policy and programming. So definitely, congratulations on this bold and brilliant new step forward, and looking forward to collaborating with the ILO in advancing meaningful youth engagement across the system. Before answering the question on the lessons learned, may I just first establish that here I'm giving the perspective of an international institution, of someone who has been working with an international institution. We have learned a lot from our experiences building capacities and strengthening capacities of public stakeholders and youth organizations in over 50 countries over the past decade, with UNESCO's toolbox on youth policy and programming and the tools on meaningful youth engagement. We have learned from youth, we have learned from public stakeholders, but still what I will be sharing today is the perception of someone who is engaged with an international institution. And I say that because perspective matters. Always there is a lens in the way in which we communicate about these issues. In practice, when we, throughout our work on meaningful youth engagement, of course, we work on it with the premise and the understanding that we will be faced with diversity. So that meaningful youth engagement does not mean and does not qualify the same in every different country or in every different context. In practice, navigating and dealing with this diversity has taught us 3 key lessons that I believe apply across the board, across thematic areas, across governance systems, whether it's at country level, whether it's at global level, international institutions, national institutions, municipal institutions. And these are the lessons, the 3 main lessons that I would like to share here with you today as an answer to your question. If I were to summarize them in 3 main words, I would say perspective, perceptions, and pertinence. So starting from perspective, as I said previously, what meaningful youth engagement is in one specific country or governance context, governance system, is not the same in another country. So countries or international organizations that have been co-constructing youth employment solutions with young people for years now, they have different standards and different experience and different challenges and opportunities ahead than countries or organizations that have never done it before, or where the culture and the historical and cultural background has shaped and structured youth and the perception around youth and who youth is and what they can do in society differently. So this practically means that every time that when seeking to design programs to advance co-constructing solutions with young people on youth employment, it is always important to consider the context, the reality, to be pragmatic. How is youth structured in a given society? What are the power relations? What is the understanding about how to engage youth in a meaningful manner? So always adaptation to context. The second lesson is perceptions, and this involves, and here I'm talking about generational perceptions. One of the things that we have seen is that often, meaningful youth engagement is a relationship between different generations, different stakeholders. Yes, public institutions, civil society, youth organizations, academia, development sector, but also generations. Often, we see that public institutions have a different understanding and rationale around meaningful youth engagement, around trying to advance meaningful youth engagement. For example, they often do it for, to promote inclusion or to grasp the innovation of the younger generation. Whereas meaningful youth engagement and co-constructing solutions to current challenges for the younger generation, what we hear from the younger generation is that it's a rights issue. It's a way for them to claim their power, to exist in society, to find space to voice their ideas and to reclaim their power as civic actors and civic agents. So the perceptions are different as we go into the meaningful youth engagement, we go into the engagement exercise. So what is needed is really to, what we have seen is needed, and what we have been doing at least, and it has been working in a very interesting and constructive manner, is to create spaces for intergenerational exchange, intergenerational connection and dialogue as an add-on to any training around meaningful youth engagement, any training on institutions on meaningful youth engagement. And these spaces need to be brokered and need to be facilitated by honest brokers that can bring the different generations together. And then last, and I will close with that, pertinence. The final P is pertinence. Pertinence of, like, for example, when we want to apply training packages on meaningful youth engagement and to help co-construct solutions, I think it was said very well also by previous speaker, not all stakeholders have similar, and particularly youth stakeholders, not all youth groups have similar capacities of engaging meaningfully. Some young people who have had opportunities to engage in different spaces where they can advocate and express themselves and represent their ideas and negotiate trade-offs. You know, they have built capacities to engage in a specific way. In other cases, we see more at the grassroots, for example, young people may have different ways of expressing their ideas, their voices, their needs, of engaging in a conversation. So always, and of course, this does not only apply to young people and the younger generation, it also applies to public institutions, because within public institutions, we also find that often officers who deal with youth programs do not have sufficient training on meaningful youth engagement. So they are not, they don't have the capacity also within the institutions, whether these are national or global as well. So it is important to, again, identify the specific needs and modes of engagement, the capacity gaps, and also the capacities that exist, and tailor programs that seek to promote co-construction based on capacity. And if there are capacity gaps, then also seek to address those. Bottom line, a whole of society approach is needed to strengthening capacities on meaningful youth engagement and advancing co-construction. And one size does not fit all. Adaptation is the master word. Thank you, Isha.
Thank you so much, Maria. Some excellent points made by you. I think quick takeaways is the importance of tailoring approaches. Not everything that works in one context will work in another. And the importance of working through partnerships and collaboration. It's not just the Ministry of Youth or the Ministry of Labor's responsibility to engage young people, but it is really working across different organizations and institutions to engage young people. And I think very importantly, the importance of ensuring or rather recognizing that young people are truly diverse. So we can't imagine that young people who have been exposed to participation would have the same same sort of capacity to engage versus somebody who's never engaged in, say, global forums or regional discussions. Thank you so much, Maria, for sharing your lessons from UNESCO's work, which we all hope to apply in each of our institutions' work as well. And with that, I move to our next and last panelist for today. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mary Aisha Menta, Policy Officer at the African Union Commission. Welcome, Mary. And my question to you is that if you could tell us, how is the African Union Commission ensuring that young people's input meaningfully influences youth employment strategies and frameworks at the continental level? Over to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Isha, and thank you to other panelists for the insightful contributions to this session. And also congratulations to ILO for the new framework on youth. Just to start with a little bit of background is that we all know that there's a deficit in the labor market compared to the growing population of youth in Africa. So the labor market is not sufficient enough to absorb the youths that are, graduating in Africa. So this had led to a little bit of challenge and imbalance in the labor market. That is why the AU and the ILO came together, I think in 2022 or 3, if I'm not mistaken, and to develop what is called the Youth Employment Strategy for Africa. So the AU and ILO developed this Youth Employment Strategy for Africa to bridge the gap between the deficit we have in the labor market and the growing youth population, and to solve the problem of unemployed youth and also underemployed youth. So the Youth Employment Strategy, shortly called, it's called the Yes Africa. It's for member states, the 55 member states we have in the AU, to incorporate into their respective national youth policies and youth strategies, just as a guiding framework to ensure that there's a solution to the unemployment issue on the continent. This strategy was adopted officially last year in February 2025 at the highest AU governing body. It was adopted at AU Summit in February 2025. So it's an official strategy that member states can be able to adopt and incorporate into their policy making. Talking about youth engagement, I can remember when we initially started the drafting process of this strategy, and at the workshop, the drafting workshop, one of the agreements between A and ILO was that we were going to involve youths from the onset through all the stages of leading to the adoption of the strategy. And thankfully, we were able to, fulfill our agreements. And first of all, from the consultations to the validation of the strategy, we ensured that youths were involved. We presented this strategy to the STC, that is a Specialized Technical Committee, the AU Specialized Technical Committee on Youth and Sports. That was the first engagement we had with youth, where we presented the strategy to them, and we, harnessed their inputs and their comments to make sure that the voices and the comments of the youth were reflected into the strategy. And also, we had a youth co-creation workshop, and Isha was there. We had a co-creation workshop where specifically we invited the youth from, all over the continents, all the 5 regions of the continent, where we sat them down. I think we had a 3-day workshop where we went through the strategy bit by bit, segment by segment, to ensure that the youths, commented, imputed, and, that was the first point where I fell in love with the mantra, nothing.
I think we may be temporarily lost Mary. I'm not sure if others are able to hear her. Okay. So maybe we can. Sorry, Mary, we lost you for a couple of seconds. Are you able to hear us?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry about that. It was network connection. So at the youth co-creation workshop, the youth kept on, repeating that mantra, there's nothing about the youth without the youth. And yeah, it made me fall in love with that phrase. And even at the validation workshop, we ensured that youth were involved. And also even when the strategy was being adopted at the highest AU body, we had a youth representative there. So all through the stages of the adoption of that strategy, there was youth involved. So at the AU, I'm happy to say that we are committed to ensuring that there's meaningful youth engagement in policy making. And I'm sure that going forward in every policy making process that the youth are going to be involved so that we can amplify the voices of the youth, we can tap into the minds of the youth, and we can ensure that the voices and the comments of the youth are, imprinted into every policy that we make at continental level. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mary, for shedding light on a very important exercise in terms of engaging young people in a continental level youth employment framework and really co-creating with young people. Young people were engaged throughout, and I think that's an excellent example of how young people can help shape policies and strategic frameworks that guide our work. Thank you for sharing that, Mary. And now we will move to a quick round to hear from all of our panelists. So this is a quick round to get your quick takeaway on what is that one thing that institutions need to start doing and one thing that they need to stop doing when it comes to meaningful youth engagement. So in a phrase or in a couple of sentences, it would be great to have our panelists' input on this. So let's start with you, Joel. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Isha. I really think institutions should stop designing youth employment programs for young people behind closed doors and inviting us only at the validation stage. And I think institutions should start sharing decision-making powers, resources, and accountability with youth from the beginning so that we can co-create, co-lead, and co-own solutions meant to shape our future. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Joel. Over to you, Kun.
Thank you, Isha. Maybe from a government perspective, one thing I wish we would do more is to produce youth-friendly information, because a lot of the documentation that we produce contains information that's quite technical or difficult to understand for youth. So I see that still as quite a big barrier for youth to meaningfully engage with governments. And something else that maybe we should stop doing is to always think as an institution what youth engagement brings us. Of course, it's an important part of youth engagement, but the question I'm always trying to ask myself, what is in it for young people themselves? And I think that's a better starting point than to start with what's in it for a government or a MFA.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kun. And over to you, Clara.
Thank you, Isha. I had to put it simply, but institutions should stop speaking about young people and start speaking with young people. Too often, youth engagement is limited to consultations after decisions have already been shaped. Young people are invited to comment, but not to create. That approach undermines trust and reduces the participations to formality. Institutions should instead involve young people from the outset in the design, in the implementation and evaluation of policies that affect them. This means structured dialogue, representation in the decision-making spaces, and accountability mechanisms that ensure their contributions have real impact. Meaningful youth engagement, it's not about the visibility, is about shared responsibilities and shared ownership on the future.
Thank you so much, Clara, for those powerful words. Over to you, Hareen, on your perspective.
Yeah, so yeah, I have similar opinions with Clara. So for me, it comes down to this stop asking without acting and start explaining and responding. Because when young people see policies shaped without their input reflected, young people feel used. I mean, present in the room, but absent from the decision. That breaks down trust, and young people are less likely to engage again because they think our suggestions are going to be included to policies. So what we are asking for is simple, a brief explanation. We need it. Yeah, that's all. Thank you, Isha.
Thank you, Hareen. Shanita, over to you.
Thank you, Isha. A lot has been said. What institutions should stop doing is designing skeleton committee structures in design of young workers or youth. Unfortunately, yet they are not active or implemented. Therefore, they should start designing committees involving us from the word go, having us both on the table and on the menu so that we can implement and bring new innovation ideas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shanita. Maria, let's hear from you.
Thank you, Isha. I think institutions should stop saying that they promote meaningful youth engagement unless they give the budget, the time, the space, and the capacities within the institutions to really enable meaningful youth engagement with all the diversity that we discussed previously. What they should start doing, Cohen, I think, has said very well exactly what I wanted to say as well, is start reflecting what is it that young people aspire when they engage with these institutions, when they seek to engage with these institutions. What are the aspirations of the young people and how best to serve those? What is the lens through which young people view their engagement and how to best serve those through the programs and the activities that institutions promote. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And lastly, over to you, Mary.
Yeah. Yes, so I think institutions should stop thinking that they know what's best for the youth. I think the youths know what's best for them, and institutions should start thinking that it's a win-win situation for both youth and the government. So they should start bringing youth to the table so that we can all discuss and make meaningful policies together. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to our panelists. A lot to take from that discussion. And some of these actually answer the questions that we got from our audience. So now it's time for our audience questions. We've already identified some questions. I will only take those questions that maybe are new and not something that our panelists have already answered. So one of the questions that we get from Charles Tembo, he asks, how do we engage young people in designing national youth employment policies or programs beyond projects or sort of standalone activities? So how do we ensure that young people are actually engaged in designing national youth employment policies and programs? Maybe we can take a couple of questions together, and then I open the floor to the open the floor, and panelists who wish to take these questions can answer the question. Let me just repeat Charles's question specifically. How can we institutionalize youth co-creation and shared decision-making within national employment policies and programs beyond project cycles and consultations? And he also asks, particularly when it comes to refugees and forcibly displaced youth. So that's one of the questions. The other question is on what gaps, so this is from Kehinde, apologies if I'm pronouncing the name incorrectly, Kehinde Ayeni, and they ask, what are the gaps that you know, based on your experience, what are still the persistent gaps we see when it comes to youth engagement? Based on your insights or based on your experience, you know, what is not done enough and where are these gaps existent? And we have yet one more question on sustainability. How can we engage young people beyond project timelines and cycles in a sustainable fashion? And we have one more question on measuring youth engagement. So how do we know if engagement has been successful and impactful? So those are the questions we have. Can I now open the floor to whoever would wish to take any of these questions? So please let me know who would like to respond.
Okay, Isha. Should I go? All right. I'm going to answer one part of the question about how we can engage young youths. I think one of the biggest problems we have in our institutions is budget allocation. We have good structures, designs for the youth, but there's no budget for us. So at the end of the day, when you look at the youth activities, they are not being implemented because of budget allocation, and also the issue of not involving us. Usually, we're on the table, but we are not on the menu to discuss. So that's why I emphasize on being on the table and being on the menu for what we discuss to be implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanita. Maria, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Isha. I will address the question on how to meaningfully engage young people in policy, employment policy. Well, we have worked a lot on meaningful youth engagement in youth policy. Within our toolbox for youth policy and programming, there is one tool that is a step-by-step guide on how to design an inclusive youth policy with the participation of young people at all stages of the process. So we've had that experience with over 30 countries working in revising or developing their national youth policies. What is fundamental, I think Joel said it before, it's not enough to engage young people in consultations or only for validation. We see that a lot in youth policy design. Often youth policies are developed by an international consultant or by the ministry without any engagement of young people except for the point of validation or the point of the final consultation. So what we have been working, the way in which we have been working with member states so far has been that youth are involved from the very early stages of the design of the policy development process, and they remain throughout. So in order to achieve that, of course, you need political buy-in. You need the government to be on board, and that is where our institutions like, the UN system and intergovernmental organizations that promote youth engagement can advocate to government that have access to governments, can advocate to have this inclusive approach. So once you have political buy-in and commitment by the government as to an approach that includes young people at all stages of the process, what is important is that, fundamental steps along the way is to establish participatory mechanisms, basically participatory groups that engage government, youth organizations, civil society, all the relevant stakeholders, including representatives of youth organizations, of the relevant youth organizations in the country, to be at the to be steering the process. So basically, young people need to have a decision-making role within those groups that decide how the policy is developed. Then, this is the fundamental, so that you have a role in how the policy is developed, and then in the different stages of the policy, the situation analysis, the policy analysis, the consultations with stakeholder groups, and so on, that young people also are meaningfully engaged in those stages. I see, the time is not enough to go into the granular aspects and the details of that, but again, in the tool that I shared in the chat, the first tool in our toolbox provides a step-by-step guide on how to do that, and has really very concrete ideas about how to do that. And yes, very happy, of course, if there's any follow-up question to discuss our experience with as UNESCO in the different countries. And then one last point on the policy. I've spoken about policy design and development. There is also there is also a very important part that is policy implementation. But what we have seen in our experience is that if young people are meaningfully engaged throughout the policy design and development process, then the structure, then the momentum that is created is such that they remain in, because you shift the culture, basically. You shift the way in which policy is designed and the way in which people are perceived vis-a-vis the policy process. And so then when you go on to implement the policy, the ground is more fertile to meaningfully, we see a culture shift. Public institutions are more open to engaging, they are more ready to the idea of engaging young people meaningfully. And then, of course, with additional training, additional programs, activities to support that, you can sustain engagement. Sorry, I've spoken a lot, but yeah, there is but happy, if that answers the question, then happy to take follow-ups as well if needed. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Maria. I see Clara and Quinn would also like to come in. Clara, would you like to go next?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the question. I fully agree with what Maria have said. But if I may add, involving young people in public policy design means engaging them from the very beginning, not only once a proposal is already draft. We aim to create structured dialogue spaces where young people can help to identify the priorities, shape solutions, and access outcomes. And it is also essential to ensure diversity. So participation reflects different social and economic realities. Above all, it must have real impact. Youth engagement is only meaningful when young people see that their voices generally influence the decision.
Thank you, Clara. And lastly to you, Kun.
Thank you, Isha. Maybe to comment on the question where there still are gaps. For us, something that is can sometimes be quite challenging in engaging with young people in Africa and the Middle East, especially, is to find diverse representation of young people. So we still find it sometimes quite difficult to engage with young people, for example, from a rural context, since a lot of the young people that we engage with are based in big cities, in the capitals. But there are multiple barriers in that sense. You can think about language, about socioeconomic status, also about a digital gap. Some young people do not have an internet connection that makes it difficult for them to engage. So these are quite some gaps that we still face in our efforts to engage young people. And I'd actually be very interested in also hearing what the audience thinks of this, if they have any good practices or have any experiences with getting a diverse group of young people at the table in their countries or in their settings. I'd be very, very grateful to hear that. So just my 2 cents on that.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for responding to the questions. I also encourage anyone who wants to respond or comment, including on what Kun mentioned in terms of best practices. Please feel free to share your experiences, your lessons in the chat, but we'll also be continuing the conversation on the Youth Foresight platform, and you will receive the link to join that in follow-up to this webinar, along with all the resources that were shared, as well as a recording of the session. Maybe if I can, even as the moderator, maybe if I can quickly also come in on the question on how young people can be engaged beyond project cycles in national policies and programs. I just wanted to mention, some examples that we have seen on setting the agenda on behalf of the country, for example. So at the International Labour Conference that the ILO has, some governments, so that's when governments, employers organizations, and workers organizations come together to discuss key areas on the world of work. And some governments have young people representing their governments at the International Labour Conference, or the ILC. So that is also a very institutional mechanism, either through their governments or employers and workers organizations, kind of influencing decisions on the world of work. And equally, that happens at the national level when young people are represented through our social partners, our employers and workers organizations, to set national policy agendas. I know the Netherlands also in other forums have youth delegates that are able to represent the government when it comes to setting policy agendas or discussions. So those are more institutionalized mechanisms versus projects where young people can be engaged. But with that, we now move with sort of a few more minutes left. We'd like to have our last mentee poll to understand your takeaways from today's sessions. So at today's session, so as as a takeaway from our session today, we'd love to understand what is the one thing that you want to do better or differently in how you engage with young people in your work. So to our audience, I encourage you to join our mentee poll and share with us what you think you want to do better or differently. So the process remains the same. You can either click the link on the chat or go to menti.com and respond to this question. Okay, consider young people, involve youth from the beginning. Yes, I think we've said that it's not just bringing them in at validation, but really ensuring they're there from the start. What else? What are some key takeaways? Be involved in ideation phase. So I think that message, is strong from the discussion. I see it in the youth involved from the beginning and in the ideation phase. What else would you want to do better or differently? Recognizing diversity and including accommodating youth from different contexts, so urban, rural, different countries, etc. Great. So lots of inputs from young people there. Trust young people to lead their projects. Yes. So recognizing youth agency and letting them lead. Great. Co-creation from the initial phase. So lots of key takeaways from our audience in what they can do differently or better based on the discussion today. So I'm happy to see the commitment to sort of advancing youth engagement in all of your work as well. Okay. So I think we can keep the mentee up to just see what other inputs we get from people. So maybe we can still keep projecting the screen as we close. So with that, we have 4 minutes left. So I take this opportunity to thank our panelists and our keynote speaker for joining us today and sharing with us your insights and your inputs. I think this has been a really rich session where we get to learn from each other. This is still an area that we're all learning to do better in. So I think it offered the opportunity to learn from your experiences and lessons. Please note that today's session was recorded and it'll be made available in the event webpage after the webinar. The link to the page is available in the chat. The session was also broadcasted on the ILO Live and will remain available there. Before leaving, we would invite you or request you to take a short poll to give us your feedback on the session by quickly responding to the poll that you see up on your screens. So if you could take a couple of minutes before we end the webinar to fill up that poll, we would be really grateful. And that helps us improve future sessions, but also understand what types of sessions are interesting to our Youth Foresight and Prospects community. So I give you a couple of minutes to take the poll. Great. And with that, I thank you all for joining today and wish you a wonderful rest of your day, depending on where you're joining us from, and encourage you to continue the work on youth engagement and share with us your lessons, your experiences through the Youth Foresight community. And I also invite you to continue following the work of Youth Foresight so we can have future webinars together and share more practices. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, and wish you a good rest of the day.
In the path toward success, not every young person has equal opportunities to fulfill their potential. To improve future prospects of all young people, stakeholders need to holistically understand the challenges youth are facing and take action now. But how? Recent Jobs for Youth and Generation Unlimited joined forces to create a knowledge facility to promote evidence-based actions for youth interventions worldwide. This is Youth Foresight, a one-stop-shop digital platform that provides access to curated tools, publications, databases, and resources for the design, implementation, and monitoring of key youth interventions. Youth Foresight has 3 sections. In the Learn section, users can browse latest publications, trusted platforms and databases, tools, news, and blogs. The Engage section lets users discover interactive resources, such as webinars, online courses, videos, and events. And in the Contribute section, registered partners can share knowledge resources, gain visibility, and tap into a network of stakeholders dedicated to creating positive changes for young people. Our current partners have expressed their full support for Youth Foresight and encourage more organizations to join them. Our ultimate goal is to create the go-to knowledge facility for everyone, dedicated to supporting young people through evidence-based action and the power of network collaboration. So, what are you waiting for? Go explore, connect, share, and transform.